Mike Hruby is president of New Jobs for Massachusetts, which has been focused on removing the barriers in law to rapid job growth. Mike has been an employee, an employer of professional consultants, and has spent many years in grassroots politics on the pro-growth side. Mike, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us how you became involved in advocating for independent contractors.
Well, essentially, I was born into this work and didn't know it unless I looked backwards. I was born into a family of three generations of very successful performing musicians. So all my young life, I saw guys and women supporting themselves with, short-term jobs, short-term assignments, musical gigs. My first job was being a paperboy, which is almost the classic independent contractor work. As you said, I've been an employee for 20 years. I thought that had kind of some limitations. So for 25 years, I had my own firm with consultants, and I learned that there is nothing like the freedom of being self-employed, even on small, job-to-job type of business. Eventually, I left that profession and worked in grassroots for a number of years. And I discovered that conservative candidates to whom the public in America looks to for economic solutions, especially rapid job growth, had very little to say about where rapid job growth comes from, where it comes from and what public policy should do to promote it. So I said, we need to start a nonprofit that focuses on the issue of where rapid job growth comes from and how it benefits the public and the practitioners that do it.
Tell us more about New Jobs for Massachusetts and what are its main goals, though?
Well, we are a certain type of nonprofit that's called non-deductible. So you don't get a gearing for a contribution. You don't get a tax reduction, but we are allowed to basically lobby the public and inform them about legislation. We can draft legislation and submit it, and we run the full gamut of education to lobbying, and we can get out there with signs if we wish, if that's effective. So we're a nonprofit, and we have supporters who, in our case, are like-minded individuals of all shapes and sizes, and they think that our state is highly resistant to the state laws, are very resistant to new job growth. So in preparation for forming the company, we found that we have actually 71 different barriers, taxes, regulations, court cases, laws, that are barriers to job growth. So we prioritized them, and the top on the list was the law we have against independent contracting in this state, which would be an absolute fountain of better paying work for a great many people, perhaps a third of the workforce here in this highly educated state.
What's the difference between, say, an independent contractor and maybe a self-employed? Are they the same?
They're very similar. Look at it this way. Independent contracting is a way for someone to work by obtaining and conducting short-term projects for customers or clients. And it's one of several different types of self-employment. Independent contracting is self-employment, but if you open a little shop, that is also self-employment. If you want to be a ceramicist and sell tiles or something to the public, that's another form of self-employment. So, but everybody who is an independent contractor is self-employed, and they share the common characteristic of being people who know who they are and what they're good at and what they want to do, and decided to be responsible for themselves. Although they're widely accused of being tax cheats, they know that there's no money in being a tax cheat. The money is made in doing a great job, have clients come back and buy more from you because they just can't get along without whatever you do. So the two are similar. We've counted easily 17 or 18 synonyms for independent contractor, like gig workers, or we have a IRS Form 1099 workers. Sometimes corporations call them external staff. But there are a lot of words for the same thing, which is living your life economically doing short projects.
What are the main limits then on independent contracting, and are we just basically talking about state laws, or are there federal laws involved?
Mike, there are both federal and state laws involved in independent contracting and its limitations. The primary law is a federal law called the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Now, in my pocket watch, that's 82 years ago. So, and it has changed very little in 82 years. The law itself, the FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, sets a number of minimum requirements for wage and hour and terms of conditions, working conditions, laws. And the states can set their own laws that are more strict or more demanding than the federal law, but they can never get rid of the federal restriction, and they can, if in case of contradiction, the upper hand always goes to the federal government. In the case of independent contracting, interestingly enough, federal law doesn't provide for the individual to choose to be an independent contractor. And that is reflected in all the state laws. In fact, the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't really discuss independent contracting at all. It says everyone's an employee if they're doing something, and if there's some exceptions, they'll be listed in the back, which they are. So it's a mix. What's happening at the moment with this is that several of the states that are dominated by, we'll call them liberal or progressive tastes, are putting in vastly stricter requirements on who can be an independent contractor, and essentially trying to run independent contractors out of business. So it's quite a tussle. It has a lot of people's livelihoods, both part-time and full-time, are at stake. And this is a battle that is going to last well beyond the November election this year. It's going to be ongoing for quite some time.
Can you characterize your challenges then as battle against big government and unions?
Actually, it's the unions come first. And they have made common cause with the plaintiffs' attorneys, which is people who, in the U.S. law, they are aggrieved over something and want to get employer money to compensate them. And those two hunt together, the plaintiffs' attorneys and the unions, and they have seized upon government as a tool to implement what it is, the control that they want over the private economy. And big government is part of it, but if you just rail against big government, you're missing your real target, and you're missing the weaknesses as well of the unions and the plaintiffs' attorneys. So we try to change what the government does, and incidentally the size of it, but big government for the last 80 years has been a result of big union power and their alliance with plaintiffs' attorneys.
What states are the laws and the limitations the worst? California would probably be way up on the top there, I would think. Now, not saying that just because it's a Democrat-run state, but I've heard some horrendous stories about California.
California has absolutely the worst law. It's a 5,800-word. It's like as long as a chapter of a good-sized chapter of a regular book, and its biting teeth are copied from Massachusetts law. So I would say, in terms of damage, Massachusetts have the second worst law, but we managed to accomplish all that damage in 100 words. So it is at least easy to read and to some extent understand. There are several third place states, but their damage is so much less that very few people even know they have what's called this ABC test in their law. So they don't really qualify to be numerically ranked. But coming up from the side is the federal government, where a bunch of blue state senators and the representatives, federal senators, are proposing something called the PRO Act, which is California's law, but made even worse by several other provisions that are unrelated to independent contracting. But the federal law that's been proposed, and there are now two of them doing slightly different bad things, are really would be far worse than any state law has even dreamed of being. So the question is, did the unions stop working the state model when they learned enough about what would happen in California that they switched to the federal? Or was federal what they always wanted to do, and California was just the warm-up? So we're learning about that strategy.
Can you give us an example then of bad legislation?
There's been a new act proposed. I have not read it. I just learned about it. These are sort of going through one side of our government and not the other sides. So you never know how seriously to take them 3 weeks before an election. It's called the Worker Flexibility and Small Business Protection Act. And so you can be guaranteed, given where we are on the calendar, that this will absolutely make all workers inflexible union members and crush small business. And that's what it does. It completely ends nationwide independent contracting. It ends what's called the franchise model, which is all the fast food and consumer services that use brand names and sell nationwide. I'm sure you have many of them in Australia. And it ends them. It subjects all business, large and small, to gigantic paperwork requirements and horrible fines that can be up to 1% of the net of the company. In other words, the government would become a small shareholder of all these, 1% is a shareholder of all these companies if they're penalized. And they set forth a number of privacy violation provisions of publicizing, demanding that the companies publicize the name and address of certain executives of the company, which is just setting them up for shaming and vandalism. So it is an unimaginable bill. It's actually being proposed in Congress. People cannot understand why they're doing it. And I would consider this to be a class 1 example of just an unimaginably damaging, terrible law where the very, very few are benefit while the rest are hurt.
Is this a Democrat-led initiative, or is it supported on both sides?
This is a union-led initiative. The unions and their fellow travelers, the progressives, which is very far left, farther left even than most union bosses, is leading. They're in a precarious position. And they believe they're going to win both chambers of our legislature and the executive branch, the presidency. And so they're teeing up all of this really extreme legislation so that later on, when they believe they're going to win, they'll be able to say to people, well, we told you and the voters voted for it, so step aside, we're going to do this.
We're coming up to the presidential elections, as you mentioned. Global news around the world never stops astounding us because there are so many things that are popping out left field. What are either sides, though, saying about such laws and the limitations on the self-employed?
That is an excellent question, Mike, because it has such a puzzle. It's a puzzle. And it doesn't have a clear answer. The battle started when a union boss, very powerful union boss named Rich Trumka, said that Democrats, he literally threatened Democrats. He said, you won't get a dollar or a door knock from us if you don't help pass our legislation, support it. And he meant the PRO Act and this other worker, flexibility act. So that means we're going to withdraw from you, which is, they are the teeth and the money of the Democratic Party. Right away, Biden and later Biden-Harris said, nope, we're totally for you. We're for the PRO Act. We want to make California law nationwide law, so we're all in. Count us there. Okay. When their first act passed the House, President Trump said, I am going to veto it if it gets this far. I am opposed to this. So independent contracting became a presidential campaign issue. And Biden has repeated his claims that he'll support the unions and drive people into union jobs. That is not what any independent contractor wants. Guaranteed. There are just none that want that. And there are 57 million Americans who want to be independent contractors or self-employed some of the time or all of the time. In other words, full-time, part-time. Now, so Trump, when Trump said that he wanted to, he would veto it and opposed it, and he's repeated that, it became a presidential issue. So we said in our little, independent contracting self-employment cave, we said, this is a presidential issue. We're going to get some debate on this. But Republicans have not really run against it. And I'm sure you can look it up and find more than I've found, because I haven't looked thoroughly, but it hasn't been on anybody's megaphone yet, which is how I judge it. It's on Trump's megaphone once or twice and then not. So the Democrats are loudly in favor, Mike. The Republicans are mostly silent. It sounds like an opportunity gone wasted, but it's still there 3 weeks. And, every day is a whole separate campaign at this point. So that's the best I can do. It's a lopsided situation.
Dave Rubin said that government is fantastic in coming up with solutions that they've created the problem in the first place. So, and it's very true. I mean, they're experts, and then they create more problems from that solution, and it just goes round and round and round. And it doesn't matter which side, whether you're on the right or the left. Look, when you look ahead, say 5 years' time, does all this upset or upheaval about AB5 and part-timers, freelancing make a difference?
It makes an enormous difference, Mike. I sometimes feel like one guy trying to get everybody's attention by banging one pot out in the middle of the field. We're in a battle for access to the free market by the ordinary individuals of this country at any time of their lives that they feel they need it. And we don't make any money. If we win, I won't make a dime. It's just something that needs to be done. And if we fail to do this, we will lose access to the private sector. The unions do not want individuals to know their real value, because then they'd go get it and they would be happy with their lives, and they're not a customer for the grievance industry. They don't want, for instance, the education unions don't want you to know how inexpensive really good education can be. It's one excited teacher, one subject, and any number of students. And now with online education, it's hundreds of thousands of students. They don't want anyone to know that. They don't want you to be comfortable in your work and have a flexible schedule, because you won't complain, you won't strike, and you certainly won't want to be represented by a union, because you have customers, you love them, and you serve them. So we're fighting here in this battle, and we'll be fighting next year too, to make sure that the individual, whether it's just out of college or she's got a family and needs part-time work, or a retired couple and they want to work for a couple more years and strengthen their retirement income, whoever they are, someone just got fired, giving them access to the best thing that they can be is where we all benefit. We will have a bigger economy, we will have a happy, undivided country, and we will have widely spread wealth of a type that people earn. So this is an enormous battle, and the unions are as opposed to every word that I've said as they possibly could be. So it is, it's an issue to follow. I spent 8-9 years in absolute anonymity, and this year it just exploded into the public view, and it will continue there until we've got the problem solved.
Mike Hruby, interesting times ahead. No more interesting than the next 3 weeks. Good luck. Hopefully your nerves will last you that time. Great chatting, talking, and all the best. And we must do this more often too, I think.
I've enjoyed it very much, and I look forward to talking again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.